So before I get into complications, um, I will talk about what's available, digital occlusal technology systems to all of you, and then how they can be applied in clinical practice. The opinions expressed tonight are mine and not those of TechScan. And I have no financial relationship with any dental company. I do not receive compensation for sales of any dental product shown in the presentation. And as I said, the opinions are mine and not those of TechScan, our very nice sponsor. So let's get into it. What are the available digital occlusal technology systems that you can use in your day-to-day practice? Well, of course, the T-Scan 10 Novus, which is the newest version of T-Scan, it has 40 years of system evolution behind it. And I began using it in 1984. And it measures 256 relative occlusal force levels. It shows them to you in colors, and they're recorded in a dynamic way in 3,000ths of a second video framing, and it allows you to see incredible detail into the occlusion, which we'll obviously show you in this seminar. Then a more recent introductive technology is the Occlusense 1 by Bausch from Germany. It's about 5 years old. It also shows 256 relative occlusal force levels, but it captures them in a much slower rate, in a half a second. And it marks the teeth similar to articulating paper. So the sensor has ink on it that marks teeth while you record, which may or may not be an advantage, which is something that you'd have to sort of test out for yourself. Then there's a product that's only available in South Korea. It's not really available anywhere else in the world. It's Accura. It's called Accura 1. It's about 5 years old also. It records 256 relative occlusal force levels, but in only 100th of a second. And just to show you how far we've come with T-Scan, when T-Scan 1 was first built, it recorded in 100th of a second. Now we record in 3,000ths of a second. So a major advance. So Accura is more of a mimic of T-Scan in its own right, and its desktop looks a lot like T-Scan, so it's more of a copycat technology, but it's not available to you to purchase in this country. So it's not really a player that you would become involved with. Then we have scanners, and I'm sure many of you own scanners. And scanners are kind of a wonderful advance for making impressions, but they're not an occlusal force advance in any way, because they don't record occlusal force levels despite what the scanning companies want you to possibly believe. And we'll talk about that in great detail a little bit further down the road in the presentation. They do not record occlusal force levels, and only one system records contact timing and motion, and that's MAJAW, which is extraoral sort of video capture of mandibular motion. And finally, we have InnoBite from Koubei in Canada, which is about 4 years old. And it's actually a very nice technology. It reports absolute force or real force numbers, which you can see on the display. There's a digital display showing 475 newtons. It reports in newtons. And in simple terms, the patient bites on this silicone pad with strength, and then you get a readout of their capability. And so you get a numeric assessment of their bite strength. And human bite strength ranges from like 0 to 5 to 700 newtons. Extreme bite force might be 800 to 900 newtons. So, this example is showing median human bite force, a little bit more than median human bite force. But the real question is, which one of these is best for you, the dentist, to use to treat patients? So initially, I showed you them all. Well, InnoBite, you really can't treat patients with. You can only monitor success or failure in improving someone's bite strength. For example, in this study, which T-Scan was used to treat patients' occlusions after the patients were initially recorded with InnoBite, T-Scan was then used, and then the same patient was recorded again in the same visit with InnoBite, and the group of subjects, about 30 to 40 subjects, after having T-Scan, all their, as a group, they're statistically increased in bite strength. And so InnoBite can be used to monitor those kinds of improvements or negative responses, like having weaker bite strength. But it can't really treat patients in any way. It can't treat the occlusion, tell you which contact is a problem or what part of the mouth is a problem. So InnoBite really isn't for treating patients. Then we have scanners. Well, scanners, these occlusograms, you can't treat patients with either. They may help you design crowns, they may help you design restorations, but you're going to learn a little bit more about scanners. These color-coded representations are not force, they're contact proximity. In other words, closeness of how closely teeth touch. But whether the teeth touch well or touch slightly far apart or touch very far apart doesn't translate into being able to recognize what parts of the teeth should be adjusted and how much they should be adjusted. So scanners really can't treat patients either. So that leaves you T-Scan 10 Novus and Occlusense 1 from Bausch, which have distinctly different price points. You can see the T-Scan Novus is about $11,000 US, and the Occlusense 1 is about $4,500 US. But there's a significantly different value, which you're going to come to learn, not only in the technical capabilities, but also in the usability of the two products. So first, it's important that you understand T-Scan sensors, which are mylar encased and hold up very well to repeated intercuspations. They can be used about 24 times without cracking, and they cost about $10 per sensor. And because they're encased in mylar, they can be cleaned and reused with the same patient. So if I made 3 recordings in a consultation on someone and the patient decided to come back for treatment, I could reuse that sensor another 21 times, right? So that's really a valuable thing because the sensors can be reused if needed, within limits. If you used it 20 times on someone, you don't want to reuse it. But certainly it's has a very good lifespan and it holds up very well to intercuspation. Occlusense sensors, on the other hand, cost about $16 per sensor, and they only last for 5 to 7 intercuspations. They're not very strong. They don't hold up well to intercuspation. They perforate readily, which was determined in this individual assessment of the two technologies written by Dr. Sutter, which he published in 2019. He found repeatedly that that the Occlusense sensors didn't hold up well, and they had to be changed because when you have a broken sensor, electronic sensor, as these types of sensors are, you get a corrupted output, and you get basically a break in the circuitry. So the other thing about Occlusense sensors, which is they can't be reused because they're surrounded by cardboard, and of course the ink smears off once you start biting on it. But the cardboard can't be sterilized, it can't be alcoholed off, it can't be reused. So these have much shorter lifespan. Now, in terms of their accuracy, an independent study done by this group in Spain, which was published in 2023, found that the T-scan was able to reproduce the 256 force levels with very low variation, which means they basically produced linear force reproduction in multiple contacts on the screen or on the test casts, which I'll show you what that means in a second. Whereas Occlusense had a high level of reporting variation, 12%, compared to 0.8%, which means that T-scan was 15 times more accurate. And that means a lot when you're treating someone and you're recording on them a number of times in a single session. You want linear force reproduction, right? No matter how many times the sensor is crushed. So what's interesting about this new study is it actually replicated this study published in 2006 that I was a part of that showed that the the HD sensor, which is the Generation 5 sensor that we use today, tested in 2006 in this handle, this T-scan evolution handle, produced linear force reproduction across 6 or 7 contacts with repeated crushing. And this was tested with 30 or 40 sensors. And so this is exactly what this group in this paper in 2023 actually found, was this very low variation after repeated crushing, which is, again, really important when you repeatedly record on people. You want to get accurate, reproducible force data. Now, something that these technical things are important to show you some of the differences. Occlusense, although it represents 256 levels of force, it only uses a 4-color scheme, which means each color represents 64 force levels. So the difference between what is green tall or green small or red tall or red small is very hard to discern. And it makes it impossible to fine-tune subtle contact changes because there aren't enough force levels per color. There's too many. Whereas T-scan, you have 18 colors and you have 14 force levels per color. And this is 4 times more broken up, essentially, or 5 times more broken up, which means that you can readily fine tune the difference, for example, between those two contacts and that contact. And the columns are only 1 height per color. So you don't have tall pinks and small pinks. You have tall pinks and tall reds and oranges for high force. You have orange, yellow, light green, aquamarine for medium force, and you have blue and dark blue and very dark blue for low force. And you can see the scale here. So there's no confusion. This is very confusing. What is the similarity between these two colors? Why is one small? Why is one tall? And then you have another issue, which is the Occlusense arch is generic. It has no tooth delineations. So where is this area? On what part of the tooth is all of this force? And what do you adjust? And where is it? Is it on the mesial-modular ridge? Is it on the lingual surface? Is it on the buccal surface? I mean, we can make generalizations, but it's not accurate in any way. Whereas T-scan data is very clear where it is. You can actually incorporate an STL file and overlay the STL file with the force data. And for example, in this case, if we wanted to adjust this high force on this overloaded implant, we know we're dealing with the mesiobuccal cusp. It's very clear what needs to be adjusted with T-scan. This is far more diffuse. And although these are technical issues, there is a significant main issue that all of you who are contemplating getting into digital occlusion and possibly purchasing one of these two systems, the most important difference between the two systems is not a technical one. It's not a mechanical one. It's this one. T-scan data is extremely well understood. So we can teach you. You can learn how to use its data to treat occlusal problems in many known clinical applications. As Diana was introducing the 4-volume encyclopedia handbook, there's T-scan in orthodontics, T-scan in prosthodontics, T-scan in implants, T-scan in TMD, T-scan in posture, T-scan in general occlusion. We have applications and proven protocols in many, many, many disciplines in dentistry that you come across every day in your practice. Whereas Occlusense data is not understood at all. It's not T-scan. This is not T-scan data. And why some of these red columns are this tall and some are only this tall and this orange one is as tall as this red one, someone has to figure that out, what all that means. But as of now, no one knows what that means. It has not been through rigorous testing and protocols haven't been developed, which means you can't use it with any known accuracy in any dental clinical application. And that's actually a real issue. So in that way, Occlusense 1 is very much like T-scan was. T-scan 1 was 40 years ago. This is T-scan 1. This is what I started with, carrying around Tufts Dental School, studying dental students. Unless there's someone like me who wants to figure out Occlusense 1, a typical Occlusense user is on their own. You would have to be like me. You'd have to figure out what all this means in the Occlusense world. And unless you're willing to do that, you're not going to be able to use it effectively on patients. And that means someone who purchases it isn't going to be able to use it effectively on patients. You may think using it effectively on patients, but it has no known protocols. So that's the huge value difference between the two technologies. T-scan, you can learn to use it and treat a lot of things, right? So why do I recommend that doctors use the T-scan 10? Exactly what I was talking about. 40 years of product iteration, multiple generations of sensors. This is the 5th generation of sensor. The HD Novus sensor is highly reproducible, highly accurate, and other hardware and software system accuracy improvements have been made along the way, right? And importantly, there are over 400 papers in the literature substantiating its clinical efficacy in multiple dental disciplines. This paper by Dr. Chowdhury below actually goes through, is a systematic review that goes through all of the things that the T-scan does and has been tested in research environments, in studies with metrics and data and statistics. So what that means is there are multiple clinical protocols that have already been developed, tested, and validated effective with patients that you can learn to use to treat patients with, right? So all you have to do is learn how to use it effectively, which is a learning curve, no question, but the protocols exist for how you use it with Invisalign, or how you use it with an all-on-4 case. And so this is a huge advantage over Occlusense 1. There are no proven clinical protocols, and there are no tested, validated methodologies as of yet. So T-Scan is ready to go if you feel it's something you'd like to get involved